The hungriest people aren't always the ones asking for food. Sometimes, they're the ones who've forgotten what kindness feels like. I didn't know that simple truth would change for lives forever. That Thursday had already been too long before the clock reached 6 in the evening. My hands smelled like lemon cleaner. My back ached from scrubbing hardwood floors in a house that could have swallowed my tiny apartment whole, and my sneakers were damp from walking 6 blocks through a steady spring drizzle after my bus broke down. Every dollar mattered when you were raising a 6-year-old daughter alone. Every shift meant groceries. Every tip meant keeping the lights on another week. By the time I stopped at the little diner near Riverside Park, I counted the bills inside my worn wallet twice before ordering the cheapest hamburger on the menu. It wasn't much, but after cleaning houses for 10 hours, it felt like a reward I'd earned one aching muscle at a time. The paper bag felt warm in my hands as I crossed toward the park, hoping to enjoy a quiet dinner before picking Lily up from my neighbor's apartment. The rain had faded into a cool mist, leaving everything smelling like wet grass and fresh pavement. A few joggers hurried past while parents called their children home before sunset. That's when I noticed him. A little boy sat alone on a wooden bench beneath an old maple tree. Maybe 7 years old. Dark hair, pale skin, expensive clothes that somehow made him look even lonelier. He wasn't crying. Somehow that made it worse. His shoulders were slumped, his small hands folded together, and his eyes stayed fixed on the ground as if the whole world had forgotten he existed. Then he glanced toward the paper bag in my hands. Just for a second. Most people would have missed it. I didn't. I recognized that look because I'd seen it on Lily before I could afford regular dinners after my divorce. It wasn't greed. It was quiet hope, trying not to become disappointment. I walked over before I could talk myself out of it. "Hey," I said softly, keeping enough distance so I wouldn't scare him. "Would you help me with something?" He looked up, confused but polite enough to answer with a tiny nod. I smiled and opened the wrapper. "This hamburger is way too big for one person. Think you could help me finish it?" His eyes widened. "Really?" he whispered. "Really?" I tore it carefully into 2 equal halves and handed him one wrapped in the napkin. For a moment, he simply stared at it like it was something far more valuable than dinner. Then he took one cautious bite. His entire face changed. The sadness didn't disappear completely, but something warmer flickered behind his eyes. A shy little smile. The kind children wore before life convinced them to hide it. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You're welcome." We ate in comfortable silence while birds settled into the trees overhead. It felt strangely peaceful, like the world had paused just long enough to breathe. I never noticed the black SUV parked across the street. I never noticed the men in tailored suits standing perfectly still beneath their umbrellas. And I certainly never noticed the tall man behind me, covered in intricate tattoos beneath the sleeves of an expensive black suit, watching his son smile for the first time in months without saying a single word. The little boy finished the last bite slowly, almost as if he wanted to make the moment last forever. He brushed a few crumbs from his jacket and looked up at me with bright gray eyes that no longer seemed quite so heavy. "My name is Noah," he said. "I am Emily." I offered my hand, and he shook it with surprising seriousness for someone so young. "Thank you for sharing with me." "You do not have to thank me," I replied with a smile. "Sometimes people just need someone to sit with." He looked toward the pond where a family of ducks drifted across the calm water. "Most people tell me not to talk to strangers." I laughed softly. "That is usually very good advice." He lowered his voice. "But you do not feel like a stranger." Something about those words squeezed my heart. Children had an honest way of seeing people that adults often forgot. Before I could answer, my phone vibrated. It was my neighbor texting that Lily had finished her homework and wanted to know when I was coming. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. "I have to pick up my daughter soon." Noah tilted his head. "You have a little girl?" "She is 6. She keeps me very busy." His expression changed again, not sad exactly, but thoughtful. I wish I had someone to play with every day. I noticed he never mentioned his mother. I did not ask why. Some questions belonged to people who had earned the answers. "Well," I said, standing and brushing the damp leaves from my jeans, "I think today turned out better than either of us expected." He nodded, then surprised me by wrapping his small arms around my waist for the briefest second. It was not dramatic. It was simply the hug of a lonely child who had needed kindness more than food. When he stepped back, I smiled and gently straightened the collar of his jacket. "Promise me something." "What?" "The next time you feel sad, Remember that bad days do not last forever. He looked at me very carefully before answering. Will I see you again? I hesitated. Life had taught me not to make promises I could not keep. Maybe, I said honestly. The world is smaller than we think. I waved goodbye and started walking toward the bus stop without looking back. I never noticed the quiet movement behind the trees. Several men in dark tailored suits watched every step I took, waiting only for one person's signal. None of them spoke. Their attention remained fixed on the tall man standing beneath a large black umbrella. Adrian Moretti had built an empire by reading people in seconds. He could recognize fear, greed, deception, and ambition with a single glance. Yet the woman walking away confused him completely. She had accepted nothing, asked for nothing, expected nothing. She had simply divided her only dinner because she believed a lonely child deserved half. Noah walked toward his father carrying the folded napkin that still held a few crumbs. His small smile remained. Adrian knelt until they were eye level. Did you enjoy your dinner? Noah nodded. She said the hamburger was too big for one person. Adrian knew immediately that had been a gentle lie. He had seen the receipt still resting inside the paper bag after she walked away. There had only been one meal. He looked toward the street where Emily disappeared into the evening crowd, then quietly stood again. One of his security men stepped closer. Sir, should we investigate her? Adrian kept watching the sidewalk long after she was gone. No, he answered calmly. We are going to learn who she is, but we will do it without disturbing her life. The next morning began before sunrise, just like every other weekday in my life. I packed Lily's lunch, braided her blonde hair while she finished the last bite of her cereal, and walked her 3 blocks to school before catching the number 7 bus across town. The city was already awake, coffee shops crowded with commuters, delivery trucks squeezing through narrow streets, and people rushing toward offices where their biggest worry might have been an overflowing email inbox. Mine was wondering whether the elderly couple I cleaned for every Tuesday would renew my hours next month. As I climbed the marble steps of the Bennett residence, I pushed every thought about the lonely little boy from the park into the back of my mind. Some people drift into your life for only a few minutes. That was what I kept telling myself. Around noon, my phone buzzed while I was polishing the dining room windows. I almost ignored it because unknown numbers usually meant telemarketers or overdue bill reminders. Instead, I answered. Emily Carter, a calm woman's voice asked. Yes. My name is Victoria. I represent the Moretti family. Mr. Adrian Moretti would like to invite you to lunch this afternoon regarding a professional opportunity. I frowned, certain she had called the wrong person. I think you have the wrong Emily. No, Miss Carter. We have the correct person. Transportation can be arranged if necessary. My stomach tightened. I had never heard the name Moretti before, but something about her careful tone made the invitation sound less like a request and more like a carefully planned appointment. I appreciate the offer, but I already have work today. Tomorrow, then. I do not usually meet strangers. There was a brief pause before she replied. Neither does Mr. Moretti. The call ended politely, leaving me staring at my phone while my reflection looked back from the spotless window. That evening, after picking Lily up from school, I found a cream-colored envelope resting against my apartment door. There was no stamp, no mailing address, only my name written in elegant handwriting. Inside was a simple invitation to lunch at a quiet Italian restaurant overlooking the Hudson River. Nothing else except the time and a handwritten sentence at the bottom. Noah would like to thank you properly. My heart skipped. So the little boy's name had not been a coincidence. I almost threw the invitation away. Instead, I placed it on the kitchen counter while Lily colored pictures beside me. Mommy, she asked without looking up. What happens when somebody wants to say thank you? I smiled faintly. Usually they say it. Then why are you thinking so hard? Children noticed everything. The next afternoon, curiosity finally defeated caution. I borrowed my neighbor's navy blue cardigan because it looked a little nicer than anything I owned and arrived exactly on time. The restaurant overlooked the river, quiet enough that every table seemed to have its own pocket of privacy. Before I could tell the hostess my name, a man in a tailored black suit approached with respectful calm. Miss Carter, this way, please. I followed him through the dining room until I saw Noah sitting near the window. His face lit up the instant he recognized me. Across from him sat the man from the park, no umbrella this time, only an impeccably tailored charcoal suit that barely concealed the intricate tattoos climbing above the collar of his crisp white shirt. His gray eyes met mine with steady composure as he rose to his feet. "Thank you for coming," Adrian Moretti said. "My son has been hoping to see you again." Adrian waited until I sat down before taking his own seat again. There was nothing theatrical about the gesture, yet it carried the quiet confidence of a man who had spent his life making people listen without raising his voice. Noah smiled at me from across the table, already reaching for the basket of warm bread. "I told Dad you would come," he said proudly. He did not believe me. Adrian allowed the smallest hint of a smile. "I believed he hoped you would come." A server appeared almost immediately, placing glasses of water on the table before disappearing with the same silent efficiency. I glanced around the restaurant. Every other guest seemed relaxed, enjoying lunch as if nothing unusual existed beyond the windows overlooking the Hudson River. Yet something about this table felt different. People passed by Adrian with respectful nods. The staff anticipated every detail before anyone asked. It was the kind of attention money alone could not explain. "Miss Carter," Adrian began, "I owe you an apology." I blinked in surprise. "For what?" "For having someone contact you without introducing ourselves properly. That was inconsiderate." I had expected authority. I had not expected accountability. It was unexpected, I admitted. "But I am here now." Noah tore another piece of bread and grinned. "See? I told you she was nice." His excitement was impossible to fake. Every few seconds he looked at me as though making sure I had not disappeared. I noticed how often he searched his father's face before speaking, almost asking for permission without words. Adrian noticed it too. "Order anything you like," he said quietly. "Lunch is simply lunch. There are no obligations attached to it." I studied him for a long moment. His expensive watch, the crisp white shirt beneath the black jacket, the intricate tattoos visible above his collar whenever he turned his head. None of those details matched the calm way he watched his son laugh over something as simple as fresh bread. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Of course. Why did you invite me?" Adrian looked toward Noah before answering. "Because yesterday my son smiled for the first time in longer than I care to admit." The words settled over the table with unexpected weight. Noah lowered his eyes, quietly tracing circles on the tablecloth with one finger. "He misses his mother," Adrian continued, his voice remaining steady even as something softer appeared behind his gray eyes. "Since she passed away, he has withdrawn from almost everyone." I felt my heart tighten. Suddenly the loneliness I had seen on the park bench made perfect sense. "I am sorry," I whispered. Adrian nodded once. "Thank you." Silence lingered between us, but it was not uncomfortable. It felt honest. Finally I smiled at Noah. "Your dad seems very worried about you." Noah shrugged. "He is always working." Adrian exhaled slowly, accepting the quiet truth without defending himself. I recognized that expression because I had seen it in my own bathroom mirror after working double shifts and realizing another week had passed too quickly with Lily. Parents carried guilt differently, but they all carried it. Lunch arrived, filling the table with comforting aromas of roasted vegetables, grilled chicken, and fresh herbs. Noah immediately looked toward my plate instead of his own. "Is it enough food this time?" he asked with complete innocence. I laughed before I could stop myself. Adrian looked confused until Noah added, "Yesterday she gave me half because she said one hamburger was too big." Adrian's eyes met mine across the table. Neither of us spoke. We both knew the truth. I had not shared because I had too much. I had shared because I could not ignore a lonely child. For the first time since I sat down, Adrian looked at me not with curiosity, but with genuine respect. When lunch ended, I reached instinctively for my purse. It was an old habit born from years of counting every dollar before spending it. Adrian noticed the movement and gave a slight shake of his head. "Please," he said quietly. "Allow me." I smiled politely. I always pay for my own meal when I can. His expression did not change, but something thoughtful crossed his eyes. "Then perhaps you can allow me to thank you as Noah's father instead." I hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "All right, as Noah's father." That answer seemed to matter more than I expected. Outside, the afternoon sun reflected off the Hudson, turning the water into rippling bands of silver. Noah insisted on walking beside me instead of climbing directly into the waiting SUV. "Can we feed the birds for 5 minutes?" he asked hopefully. Adrian checked his watch. then slipped it back beneath his shirt cuff. 5 minutes. Noah grinned and hurried toward the riverside walkway. I laughed softly as I watched him run. He seems happier today. Adrian folded his hands behind his back. He has spoken more in the last 24 hours than he did during the previous 2 weeks. I looked at the little boy tossing tiny pieces of bread toward a flock of pigeons gathering near the railing. Children do not always need expensive things, I said. Sometimes they only need someone who notices them. Adrian remained silent for several seconds. You make it sound simple. It is simple. I turned toward him. Simple does not always mean easy. He studied me with the same calm intensity he had carried since we met. Victoria told me you work as a housekeeper, mostly residential homes, and you are raising your daughter alone. I nodded. Lily and I have managed just fine. Managed, he repeated thoughtfully. That is different from living comfortably. I smiled. Comfort is a luxury. Peace is enough. Before he could answer, Noah ran back toward us holding a smooth gray stone. Look what I found. He handed it to me with complete trust. The rock was ordinary except for a tiny white line running through the center. It looks like a little lightning bolt, I said. Noah beamed. You keep it. I cannot take your treasure. I want you to have it. I slipped the stone into my jacket pocket. Then I will keep it safe. Adrian watched the exchange quietly. There was something almost wistful in his expression, as though he was witnessing moments he wished he could create himself, but never quite knew how. As we walked back toward the parking area, 2 men in dark suits approached Adrian, speaking softly enough that Noah could not hear. I caught only a few words before they stepped farther away. She has a daughter. Elementary school. Routine confirmed. My footsteps slowed. Adrian noticed immediately. Excuse me for a moment. He walked several feet away with the man, while Noah continued telling me about the different birds he wanted to learn to identify. Although Adrian kept his voice low, I saw the way his expression hardened with quiet disapproval before he dismissed the men with a single nod. A minute later he returned. I apologize, he said. Business. I looked directly into his eyes. Did your employees investigate me? He did not answer immediately, and that silence was answer enough. Only to ensure you were safe, he said at last. I took a slow breath, disappointed more than angry. Mr. Moretti, kindness is a gift. It should never become a file in someone's office. For the first time since we met, Adrian had no immediate reply. He simply watched me walk away, carrying an ordinary gray stone in my pocket, while quietly realizing that the one thing money had never taught him was how to earn another person's trust. The subway ride home felt longer than usual. I sat beside the window watching the city blur past, but my mind stayed on one sentence. Kindness is a gift. It should never become a file in someone's office. I wondered whether I had been too harsh. Then I remembered how carefully I had built my quiet little life after my divorce. Trust was not something I handed out easily anymore. When I reached my apartment building, Lily came racing down the hallway before I had even unlocked the door. She wrapped both arms around me so tightly that I nearly lost my balance. Mommy, guess what? She asked. Mrs. Jenkins says I got 100% on my spelling test. I kissed the top of her head and laughed. I knew you could do it. We celebrated with grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup because that was what we could afford, and somehow it tasted better than the expensive lunch overlooking the river. Lily spent the evening drawing pictures while I folded laundry and listened to the old radio sitting on the kitchen counter. For a few precious hours, life felt wonderfully ordinary. Across the city, however, someone else was discovering just how extraordinary ordinary could be. Adrian sat alone in his study while Noah carefully placed the smooth gray stone on the bookshelf beside a framed family photograph. The little boy smiled at it before quietly walking upstairs with his nanny. Adrian remained where he was, staring at the stone as though it carried an answer he had spent years searching for. Victoria knocked softly before entering. You asked for Miss Carter's employment schedule. Adrian looked up. Cancel it. She blinked in surprise. Sir, no more reports. No more surveillance. If I wish to know someone, I will speak to them myself. Victoria nodded without question. She had worked for Adrian long enough to recognize when a decision would not be changed. The following Saturday morning, I took Lily to the neighborhood farmer's market. We wandered between flower stands and homemade jam displays, stopping every few minutes because Lily wanted to smell every bouquet she passed. Can we buy sunflowers? She asked hopefully. I checked the cash in my wallet and smiled apologetically. Maybe next week. She nodded without complaining. That small act of understanding made me both proud and a little sad. Children should not have to understand budgets so young. We had just reached the sidewalk outside the market when I heard an excited voice behind me. Emily. I turned to find Noah running toward us with the biggest smile I had ever seen on his face. Adrian followed several steps behind, dressed simply in dark jeans and a navy sweater instead of the tailored suits I had grown accustomed to seeing. Without thinking, Noah threw his arms around me in another quick hug before stepping back to wave enthusiastically at Lily. Hi, I am Noah. Lily smiled shyly. I am Lily. Within seconds, the two children were comparing drawings from their backpacks as though they had known each other for months. Adrian stopped beside me, his hands tucked into his pockets. This meeting truly is a coincidence, he said quietly. I searched his face for any sign that he had arranged it. Instead, I found something unexpected. Hope. I believe you, I answered. Relief softened his expression. For a long moment, we simply watched the children laughing together beneath the bright yellow awnings of the market. Then Adrian spoke again, his voice lower than before. You were right. I looked at him. About what? He smiled with quiet humility. Children do not always need expensive things. Sometimes they only need someone who notices them. I spent years trying to give Noah everything except the one thing he needed most. Thank you for helping me see that before it was too late. The children refused to leave each other's side for the rest of the morning. Noah showed Lily how to skip smooth stones across the edge of the small pond inside the park, while Lily proudly explained every flower she could name from the market. Watching them laugh together felt strangely unfamiliar, almost like looking through a window into a life that neither Adrian nor I believed we deserved anymore. We found an empty bench beneath a tall oak tree, close enough to hear the children, but far enough to let them imagine they were on their own adventure. A gentle breeze carried the scent of fresh grass and blooming roses through the park, and for the first time in years, I realized I had nowhere I needed to rush. Adrian sat beside me with his hands loosely folded, his usual guarded expression softened by the sound of Noah's laughter. He has always loved nature, Adrian said quietly. His mother used to bring him here every Sunday. I turned toward him without speaking. He continued after a long silence. Her name was Sophia. She believed every problem could be made smaller with fresh air and enough patience. A faint smile appeared before fading just as quickly. After she became ill, the park visits became shorter. Then they stopped altogether. His voice never trembled, but grief has many languages. Sometimes it hides inside calm words spoken by someone who has carried them for too long. I am sorry, I whispered. Thank you. He looked toward Noah instead of me. I buried myself in work because I did not know how to carry both my own sorrow and his. I convinced myself that providing everything he could ever need was enough. He shook his head almost imperceptibly. It was not. I understood that feeling better than he realized. After my divorce, I said slowly, I spent months worrying that Lily would remember the apartment more than she remembered me. I worked every extra shift I could find because I wanted her to have stability. Then one night, she asked me why I never ate dinner with her anymore. I smiled sadly. That hurt more than every unpaid bill. Adrian listened without interrupting. There was something comforting about speaking to someone who did not rush to fix every problem. Children remember moments. I continued. Not price tags. He nodded. I am beginning to learn that. A cheerful shout interrupted us as Noah and Lily ran back, carrying handfuls of tiny white daisies they had gathered with permission from the community garden volunteer nearby. Noah handed one to his father. Lily offered another to me. Then, after looking between us with complete innocence, Noah picked another flower and held it toward me. This one is for Dad, he said. Adrian looked genuinely surprised. For me? Noah smiled. Because you forgot how to smile too. For a second, neither of us moved. Then Adrian accepted the little flower as though it were the most valuable gift he had ever received. His eyes glistened ever so slightly before he looked away toward the pond. Lily quietly slipped her small hand into Noah's. The two children wandered a few steps ahead, talking excitedly about building a birdhouse together someday. Adrian watched them before speaking in a voice barely above a whisper. Emily, would you consider spending time with Noah once or twice a week? Not as an employee, not because I can pay you, simply because he trusts you. I looked at the children, then back at the man beside me. For the first time since we met, I did not see a powerful businessman or the mysterious figure surrounded by quiet security. I saw only a father asking for help, and somehow that made saying no far more difficult than I had expected. I did not answer Adrian immediately. Instead, I watched Noah and Lily kneeling beside the pond, completely absorbed in building a tiny sailboat from fallen twigs and broad green leaves. They laughed every time the little boat tipped over before reaching the other side. Neither of them seemed to care whether it succeeded. They were simply happy trying together. I need to think about it, I finally said. Adrian nodded without disappointment. That is a fair answer. He stood as the children came running back toward us, both talking at once about whose boat had traveled farther. We spent another hour wandering through the park before saying goodbye. Noah hugged me first, then surprised Lily by asking if they could meet again the following weekend. She looked at me for permission. I smiled. If our schedules work, I would like that. The two children exchanged excited high fives before climbing into their separate worlds, one into a modest sedan driven by my elderly neighbor, the other into a quiet black sport utility vehicle waiting nearby. During the drive home, Lily rested her head against my shoulder. Mommy. Yes, sweetheart. Noah looks lonely the way I used to feel after Daddy moved away. Her words settled heavily in my che. 3 months passed more quickly than I expected. Saturday mornings slowly became our tradition. Sometimes we walked through the park searching for birds with Lily's guidebook. Sometimes we baked cookies in my tiny apartment, while Noah proudly insisted he could crack eggs without making a mess, even though he almost always left flour on his nose. Adrian never tried to change my life with expensive gifts or grand promises. Instead, he showed up carrying coffee from the little neighborhood cafe, fixed the loose cabinet door in my kitchen without being asked, and patiently listened whenever Lily wanted to explain her newest school project. Somewhere between ordinary moments and quiet conversations, the distance between our worlds became smaller. Noah laughed freely again. Lily stopped asking whether she would ever have a brother to play with because, in her heart, she already had one. One crisp autumn afternoon, Adrian invited us to a community charity event at a small neighborhood center his foundation quietly supported. There were no photographers, no speeches, and no attention-seeking. Children painted murals, families shared homemade food, and volunteers planted flowers along the sidewalks. I spent most of the afternoon helping serve meals while Adrian carried folding tables beside everyone else without introducing himself as anything important. Watching him kneel beside Noah and Lily to help them paint a wooden birdhouse, I realized power had never been the most remarkable thing about him. Humility was. As the sun began to set, the children ran ahead, chasing golden leaves swirling across the grass. Adrian and I followed at an easy pace. Do you remember the first day we met? He asked. I laughed softly. I remember sharing half of my dinner because I thought one little boy looked hungry. Adrian smiled. He was hungry. I looked at him. For a hamburger? He shook his head gently. For hope. We stood in comfortable silence until Noah came running toward us carrying a familiar smooth gray stone. I found it in your jacket when we washed it last week, he said. I think you should keep it forever. I accepted the little stone, turning it over in my hand. The tiny white line running through its center still looked like a bolt of lightning. Thank you, I whispered. Adrian stepped a little closer. Emily, I spent years believing I had to protect everyone by carrying every burden alone. Then you walked into our lives with half of a hamburger and reminded us that love is not measured by what we own. It is measured by what we choose to share. My eyes filled before I could stop them. You changed my life too, I admitted. You reminded me that trusting someone is not weakness. It is courage. The children looked back at us from several yards away, smiling as though they already knew what was about to happen. Adrian slowly reached for my hand. When I did not pull away, he gently brushed a loose strand of hair behind my ear and asked softly, "May I?" I answered with a quiet nod. His kiss was gentle, brief, and filled with the kind of respect that asks before it receives. When we opened our eyes, Noah and Lily were clapping and laughing so loudly that everyone nearby turned to smile with them. A year later, I finally opened the little neighborhood cafe I had dreamed about for years. The first item on the menu was a simple homemade hamburger named the shared meal. Every Saturday, Noah and Lily still sat by the window drawing birds while Adrian sipped his coffee across from me. Sometimes customers asked why a plain hamburger had become our best seller. I always smiled before answering, because the most valuable thing anyone can ever share is not what is in their hands. It is the kindness in their heart.